Well, John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, is a person who suffered a massive stroke last year, right before the senatorial primaries in the Democratic Party. He could have stepped out. His wife could have encouraged him to step out. The Democratic Party could have encouraged him to step out. They did not. He ended up becoming the nominee, and then he ended up becoming the senator from Pennsylvania, in large part because the Republicans decided to run for governor, a really bad candidate against Josh Shapiro, and Josh Shapiro basically dragged Fetterman across the finish line. Well, you'll recall that the narrative about Fetterman throughout the race is that everybody was playing up his health problems. It was a lie. John Fetterman has a very, very serious health problem. He had suffered an incredibly serious stroke. It had affected his function. It had affected his brain. He could not process language that he was hearing. He could not speak properly. He could not understand things. And we were told that we were supposed to ignore all of this, that to play any of this up, to even notice any of this was a form of ableism. And his wife, Giselle Fetterman, who seems like one of the grosser people in American politics, having essentially pushed her husband into continuing his run despite his extraordinarily serious health ailment, she kept saying, why don't you just leave him alone? He's totally fine. He's totally fine. Okay, so then there's a major debate, you'll recall, between Mehmet Oz, the Republican Pennsylvania senatorial candidate, and John Fetterman, in which Fetterman clearly cannot speak, in which Fetterman is botching his sentences, in which Fetterman cannot get through a full paragraph without stumbling all over himself, again, not through any fault of his own, putting aside his politics, just because he has a serious brain issue. And we were told even then that to notice was a form of ableism. And don't worry, guys, he would get better. It was very important to recognize how much better he would get. In fact, Scientific American ran an entire piece on October 21st, 2022, titled, John Fetterman Shows How Well the Brain Recovers After Stroke. Following a stroke, the brain's own repair processes can lead to a strong recovery in people such as Senate candidate John Fetterman. They talk about how he sat down for an interview with NBC News, where he had used closed captioning technology to help manage the auditory processing issues caused by the stroke. And Scientific American was very, very critical of a reporter for NBC News named Dasha Burns, because Dasha Burns suggested that he actually was not fit as a fiddle, that he had some very serious brain issues. And people like Kara Swisher over at the New York Times, one of the worst reporters in America, Kara Swisher immediately jumped on Dasha Burns and said, how dare you point out that John Fetterman is having problems processing auditory information? And that, again, that's ableism. To even notice this is ableism. So you had Scientific American defending John Fetterman's health status, saying aphasia, or the inability to understand or express speech, is very common following a stroke, impacting an estimated third of people who have one. But the brain can modify and adapt to this new injury, a process known as neural plasticity. Again, the idea here was that John Fetterman would be just fine. He would be just fine. Well, we know that last week, John Fetterman ended up in the hospital for several days. He ended up in the hospital for unspecified reasons. It was unclear whether he'd had another stroke. There were some scans done. It turned out that, thank God, he did not have another stroke. Well, now he has checked himself into the hospital for clinical depression again. And it has become perfectly obvious, or should be obvious to anyone with a brain at this point, anybody with a functioning heart at this point, anybody who has any level of empathy at all at this point, John Fetterman should not have been running for the Senate. Now, that doesn't mean that the Democrats would have lost the seat. They probably would not have lost the seat. There were other candidates available before the primary. They could theoretically have John Fetterman today step down and resign. What's amazing, however, is how quickly, even during the Senate race, there was talk about his wife, Giselle Fetterman, replacing John Fetterman in the Senate. And so the going wisdom was that if John Fetterman were to step down, his wife would replace him, which would immediately make her one of the worst people in American public life, if she's not already. Because then it would be like, okay, I ran a person I knew had a serious physical handicap and mental handicap. I ran a person I'm supposed to love, who's supposed to be my highest priority, for the Senate, and now I'm going to take a seat. I mean, it would just be extraordinary. It'd be extraordinary. And Giselle's an openly political figure. It would not be out of the realm of possibility. And again, many people in the Democratic Party are suggesting exactly this. We'll get to more of this in just a second. I mean, some people, they just need God. They just need God. And this is one reason why you should check out Hallow. Like physical exercise, daily spiritual exercise is in fact critical to your spiritual and emotional well-being. Hallow helps you maintain a daily prayer routine. It is filled with studies, meditations, and reflections that are rooted in Judeo-Christian prayer practices. You can pray alongside Mark Wahlberg, Jim Caviezel, and even some world-class athletes. You can access the #1 Christian podcast, Bible in a Year, with Father Mike Schmitz on Hallow. Though I don't personally do Lent because obviously I'm an Orthodox Jew. I know it's a very powerful spiritual time for a lot of Christians to abstain from luxuries and more deeply embrace their faith. Hallow can be an amazing resource for you if you are a Christian during this time. Set prayer reminders, invite others to pray with you, track your progress along the way. I'm constantly encouraging people to get in touch with God, to spend some time reflecting on their relationship with God. I'm constantly encouraging Christians to go back to church. Hallow is a great way for you to reconnect with your spiritual roots. Try Hallow for 3 months free at hallow.com/Shapiro. That's hallow.com/Shapiro, hallow.com/Shapiro. Now, speaking of problems that we have in the nation, obviously, if you're running a business, you have been running a business for the past several years, you got a real problem on your hands. I mean, you have Biden inflation. You had before that COVID. Now you have the possibility of economic stagnation looming up on the horizon. Well, if you gave a bunch of money to the federal government you didn't need to give to the federal government, perhaps you should try to claw some of that back. If your business has 5 or more employees and managed to survive COVID, you could be eligible to receive a payroll tax rebate of up to $26,000 per employee. It's not a loan. There's no payback. It's a refund on your taxes. The challenge is, how exactly do you get your hands on it? Go to getrefunds.com. Their team of tax attorneys are highly trained in this little known payroll tax refund program. They've already returned $1 billion to businesses, and they can help you as well. They do all the work, no charge up front, simply share a percentage of the cash they get for you. Businesses of all types can qualify, including those who took PPP, nonprofits, even those who had increases in sales. Just go to getrefunds.com, click on Qualify Me, answer a few quick questions. This payroll tax refund is only available for a limited amount of time. Do not miss out. Go to getrefunds.com again. That is getrefunds.com. If you gave too much money to the federal government, why not try to get some of that back? Go to getrefunds.com. So yesterday, John Fetterman checked himself into the Walter Reed Hospital to seek treatment for clinical depression. The announcement came from a statement released on Thursday by Fetterman's chief of staff, Adam Gentleson. It said, last night, Senator John Fetterman checked himself into Walter Reed National Military Medical Center to receive treatment for clinical depression. While John has experienced depression on and off throughout his life, it only became severe in recent weeks. Well, I mean, what could have happened in recent weeks? What could have happened in recent weeks that would have, maybe added to John Fetterman's stress? Could it be the fact that it is now February and John Fetterman officially became a senator about 5 weeks ago? Maybe that would be the issue here. The statement added that the senator had been evaluated on Monday by the attending physician of the Congress, Brian Monahan, and he had recommended inpatient care at Walter Reed. Now, again, inpatient care for depression is very different from outpatient care for depression. Outpatient care just means you went to the hospital and then they looked at you and then you left. Right? Or being under a psychiatrist's care, as millions and millions of Americans are for depression, means that you go about your daily life and then you meet with your psychiatrist. Sometimes you need medication, sometimes you don't. Being in inpatient care at a hospital for depression is a very serious business. After examining John, the doctors at Walter Reed told us John is getting the care he needs and will soon be back to himself. Okay, we keep hearing that he will be back to himself. But what is the standard for back to himself? Clearly not his pre-stroke self. Clearly, earlier this month, Fetterman was hospitalized after feeling lightheaded. Tests ruled out another stroke or cardiac event. Giselle, his wife, tweeted Gentleson's statement along with her own comments voicing her support for her husband, asking for privacy for their family. Now, again, you know what would have been the best way to achieve privacy for your family is for him not to have been running in a senatorial election with a serious brain problem. Giselle asking for privacy on the basis of his health problems that, again, you guys were hiding for months. You didn't let him do interviews. You didn't explain what was going on with his brain. You lied to the Pennsylvania people. And then when the lies ended, you then implied that anybody who was pointing this out was an ableist. She wrote, after what he's been through in the past year, there's probably no one who wanted to talk about his own health less than John. I'm so proud of him for asking for help and getting the care he needs. This is a difficult time for our family, so please respect our privacy. For us, the kids come first. Take care of yourselves. Hold your loved ones close. You are not alone. For Giselle, the kids come first. I mean, I have serious questions about her as a human being. I really do. And this is not to call out anybody who has a spouse who has depression. People should get the care that they need. There's nothing wrong with John Fetterman going and getting the care that he needs. There's something very wrong with a spouse of a person who has a serious brain problem running that person in a senatorial election when the person is not well. And then making the most of the situation politically. And then when the mental health problems continue, when the brain problems continue, then it's, well, it's all about the privacy and we wish we had our privacy. It's really again, there's only one reason that John Fetterman is in the public eye right now, and it's because the Democratic Party and the compliant media and his immediate family all decided together that it was more important that John Fetterman take that Pennsylvania Senate seat than that he actually be given time to recover from a serious brain injury. Because again, he is not a well person. That is not a rip on him. That is a reality. Despite the media's attempts to paint John Fetterman as though he is totally fine. So even the New York Times is pointing out that the additional stresses have made things worse for John Fetterman. And this is not just a question of he was in a stable position. He was never in a stable position. And this does fall on family to protect people who are not in a stable position. Can you imagine doing this to your spouse? Can you? According to the New York Times, Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, who was hospitalized last week after feeling lightheaded, checked himself into Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on Wednesday night to receive treatment for clinical depression, according to his office. His decision to do this could place Fetterman at the center of a national conversation about mental health struggles that have become more public and urgent since the pandemic began. So the New York Times is trying to now transition this conversation away from the specifics of a spouse, essentially pushing her husband into continuing a senatorial run into a broader conversation about mental health. Listen, we should all have a conversation about mental health and wellness and getting the treatment that you need and maybe what societal standards are propagating depression and mental illness. We talked about this earlier this week because obviously we've seen a massive uptick in the United States in mental unwellness, particularly among young people and teen girls particularly. But that is not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about why there's a person who had a serious stroke, who was maintained in the race, pushed forward by the left-wing press, pushed forward by his wife, and now is seeing the effects of that on his brain. All right, guys, the rest of the show is continuing right now. You're not going to want to miss it. We are going to be discussing the kids' content at YouTube with a member of PragerU. Apparently, they're just cultivating a bunch of left-wing content to be directed into your child's brain. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click the link in the description and join us.